Join me, if you will, as we take a journey to view the birth of an amazing fighting force, the United States Marines. So let's go back to the beginning, to the bar that birthed a battlefield. It's November 10th, 1775. The air in Philadelphia is cold. Lanterns are flickering on Water Street as river mist can be seen in the alleys. There's a tavern there. It's called Tun Tavern. Nothing amazing, just a typical tavern. The smell of ale, wet wool, and tobacco in the air. Men argue, laugh, and they slam tankards on tables that are already getting scarred from years of rebellion-tinged talk. But tonight, something's different. There's a fresh handbill hanging on the tavern door. It says, "To all stout fellows who wish brisk duty at sea, enlist now in the Continental Marines." Simple, kind of underwhelming when it comes down to it, but that is how one of the most feared fighting forces in history was born, in the middle of a bar room and a war barely 6 months old. Now, earlier that same day, just a few blocks away, the Continental Congress met in Carpenter's Hall. The minutes looked tame enough, motions, votes, resolutions, but buried among them was a single line authorizing 2 battalions of Marines to serve as landing parties for the Continental Fleet. It was bureaucratic on paper, but revolutionary in practice. The delegates understood the math of war. Soldiers fight on land, sailors fight at sea. But someone has to fight in between. The British had their Royal Marines. Well, if America meant to challenge the Empire, she needed her own sea soldiers, men who could shoot straight on deck, board ships in a storm, or storm a beach under fire. The ink dried, the gavel fell, and an entirely new breed of American fighter quietly came into existence. But now came the hard part, finding them. Philadelphia in 1775 pulsed with rumor and rebellion. Taverns were the nerve center. Equal parts newsroom, recruitment office, and neighborhood bar. Tun Tavern stood at the heart of it all. Just steps from the Delaware River, sailors docked nearby, merchants argued over taxes, revolutionaries debated treason between rounds of porter. Think of it as the social media of its time. And recruiters knew that was the place to cast their nets. Tun Tavern wasn't just famous, it was more infamous. Freemasons had held their meetings there. The St. Andrew's Society toasted its first Scotch whiskey under its roof. Even Ben Franklin's volunteer firemen drank there after long nights on the bucket line. So when a new military unit needed men brave enough, or reckless enough, to fight the world's greatest navy, this was the place to look. The man Congress tapped to raise the force was Samuel Nicholas, a respectable Philadelphia Quaker with good manners, good money, and a problem. Quakers preached pacifism. Yet here was Nicholas, a riding instructor and gentleman, suddenly asked to build a corps of fighters for a rebellion. Now, history doesn't say how many meetings he missed at his Quaker meeting house after that, but it is safe to assume the elders frowned. Nicholas was perfect for the job, though, precisely because of who he knew. His family owned another tavern, the Conestoga Wagon Inn, giving him a built-in network of strong backs and loose tongues. He took the commission and got to work, walking a razor's edge between respectability and rebellion. Within days, recruitment posters appeared across the city, and within weeks, Nicholas was being called Major Nicholas, the first commandant of the Marines. Picture the sign-up scene. The tavern is loud, the floor is sticky with spilled ale, a sergeant in borrowed Continental blue leans across a barrel-head table, shouting over the noise. 2 shillings a day, lads, brisk duty, steady pay, and a cut of the prize if we take a ship. Men sign. Farmhands, dock workers, sailors, a few free black men too. Their names are scattered across early muster rolls. America's first Marines were not polished patriots. They were scrappers drawn by adventure, ale, or desperation. Some probably signed their names with just a shaky X. They swore allegiance not to George Washington, but directly to Congress, and that small difference made them something unique. They weren't soldiers, they weren't sailors, but they were a weapon forged for the in-between. And Nicholas, He drilled them hard. He knew discipline would be their armor. He also knew their reputation would travel faster than a musket ball. Sailors whispered about the new green-coated men who prowled the decks like watchdogs. Marines guarded powder magazines. They broke up fights, and they kept mutiny from spreading in the cramped hell of a warship. They were Congress's enforcers, equal parts soldier and sheriff. They weren't loved, but they were feared, and that was exactly how Nicholas wanted it. Every great origin story carries a contradiction, and the Marines' first was that a Quaker pacifist led the birth of America's most aggressive military corps. Nicholas never renounced his roots, but he also never apologized. His orders were clear, his duty chosen. If peace required protection, then someone had to be willing to draw the sword first. When news of the new corps reached London, British officers scoffed. "Sea soldiers raised in a tavern," one wrote, "they'll drink themselves to death before they ever fight." And they couldn't have been more wrong. Congress outfitted Nicholas's men in whatever it could find, which happened to be a cache of green coats with white facings. They were originally meant for riflemen, but the Marines didn't complain. The color made them stand apart. The first batches drilled on Philadelphia's wharves, practicing boarding maneuvers, musket volleys, and bayonet charges. By winter, they were ready for service aboard the fledgling Continental Navy. And their first test would come sooner than anyone expected, but that's another story, one that begins not in a tavern, but in the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. Before we get to that, let's talk a little more about Tun Tavern and what happened to it. Unfortunately, the birthplace of the Marine Corps didn't live forever. Frankly, it didn't even make it too long after the Revolution. The tavern burned down in the early 1800s. Its exact site is long lost between layers of modern Philadelphia, but luckily, the legend outlived the lumber. For Marines, it became sacred ground. And each year, on November 10th, they toast not just the Corps, but the tavern where their lineage began. They were born outside the system, and they've kind of stayed that way ever since. Independent, aggressive, and a little unruly. The kind of force that thrives in chaos because chaos is where it began. And in part 2 of The Birth of the Marines, we will dig deeper into the identity and discipline of those first Marines, as well as learn a little more about their shipboard justice.